She won't fight it. She never fights anything. That's the whole point. He said it like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Like 23 years of marriage had produced nothing more useful than a woman he could predict. What Lawrence Beaumont did not know, what he could not have known, was that his wife was standing 6 feet away on the other side of the kitchen door, holding a cup of chamomile tea that had gone cold, listening to every word. Carolyn Beaumont did not move. She did not breathe loudly. She stood in the dark hallway of the house she had helped design, in the city where she had quietly built a career that her husband had spent the better part of a decade dismantling piece by piece, and she listened. The property in Kelowna is still in my name only. The Vancouver account, she's on it, but I've already spoken to someone about restructuring. By the time she figures out what's happening, it'll be over. A pause. Then Lawrence laughed. It was a short, casual sound. The laugh of a man who believes he is the smartest person in any room he enters. She'll get the condo and a settlement. It's fair. She hasn't worked in years. That was not true, but Lawrence had told that version of the story so many times he had started to believe it himself. Carolyn set the cup down on the narrow hallway table without a sound. She turned and walked back up the stairs. Her footsteps were even, measured. She did not grip the railing. She did not cry until she was sitting on the edge of the bathtub with the fan running, and even then it was brief. Not grief exactly, but the particular exhaustion of a woman who realizes that what she's suspected for months has just been confirmed in the worst possible way. There is a kind of grief that does not weep. It calculates. By the time Lawrence came to bed, Carolyn was lying on her side facing the window, her breathing slow and regular. She was already planning. People who knew Carolyn Ashford before she married Lawrence Beaumont remembered her differently than the woman she had become by the time she was 44. They remembered a woman who negotiated contracts for a mid-sized architecture firm in Toronto, who ran half marathons on Sunday mornings, who laughed too loudly at dinner parties and didn't apologize for it. They remembered someone with opinions and a professional reputation, and a business card that had her actual name on it. Lawrence had been a client, initially. He ran a real estate development company out of Calgary that was expanding into Ontario. He was handsome in the way that men with confidence and good suits tend to be. Not remarkable, exactly, but present. He took up space in a room. People listened when he spoke. He had listened when Carolyn spoke too. In those early years, she left her firm 18 months into their relationship at his encouragement. "You're too talented to be working for someone else," he'd said. And she had heard that as a compliment when it was actually the first move in a much longer game. He wanted her expertise without the inconvenience of her professional independence. She moved to Calgary. They married. She began working informally within his company, on design, on client presentations, on the aesthetic direction of his projects. Work that generated millions in value. Work that was never formalized, never compensated, never credited in any way that would leave a paper trail. When their daughter, Fiona, was born, Carolyn stepped back further. Lawrence made that easy. "You shouldn't have to work right now," he said, and again she heard care in words that were, in fact, strategy. By the time Fiona was in school and Carolyn wanted to return to professional life, something had shifted. Her network had thinned. Her certifications needed renewal. Lawrence was supportive in the abstract and obstructive in the particular. Scheduling conflicts, relocated meetings, a subtle but consistent messaging that her going back to work would be an inconvenience to their life. She believed for a long time that this was ordinary. That sacrifice was the architecture of marriage. That love required reshaping yourself to fit the person beside you. She was wrong about that. But it took 23 years and a cold cup of tea in a dark hallway to understand it clearly. The signs had been accumulating for the better part of 2 years. Lawrence traveling more frequently. A new investment contact named Petra who he mentioned too casually, and then stopped mentioning altogether. A password changed on the shared laptop. A manner toward Carolyn that shifted from indifference to something colder. Not cruelty, but the particular distance of a man who has already internally moved on, and is simply managing the logistics of departure. She had asked twice. He had denied twice. She had believed him the first time. The second time she had not believed him, but she had no proof, and she did not know, yet, what to do with suspicion alone. What she had done quietly over those 2 years was pay attention. Carolyn was not a woman who performed helplessness. She had simply allowed others to assume it. There is a difference. She had watched and noted, and kept a small notebook in the inner pocket of her winter coat, a place Lawrence would never look, because Lawrence did not wear winter coats. He drove everywhere, where she recorded things. Dates, account numbers she recognized on documents she wasn't supposed to see. The name of Lawrence's lawyer, overheard on a call she hadn't announced herself for. She had started, 6 months before that night in the hallway, to make quiet inquiries of her own. The morning after she heard the conversation, Carolyn made breakfast as she always did. Scrambled eggs, whole grain toast, coffee in the Italian press Lawrence preferred. She set his mug to the left of his plate, Because he was left-handed. Because she knew every detail of a life she was about to leave with surgical precision. Lawrence came downstairs in his robe, sat, looked at his phone. He did not look at her. He rarely did anymore. I have calls all morning, he said. I know, she said. I won't disturb you. He took his coffee upstairs. She listened to his footsteps cross the ceiling above her, moved to the far end of the house, the door of his study closing. She cleared the dishes. She dried her hands on the dish towel. She folded the dish towel over the oven handle, as she had done 10,000 times in this kitchen. Then she went upstairs to the guest room, closed the door, and called the family lawyer. Not the one Lawrence used, but the one she had retained independently 4 months ago, after she started understanding the shape of what was coming. His name was Owen Farquhar, and he practiced family law in Calgary with a reputation for being exceptionally good at protecting people who had contributed significantly to a shared life in ways that were difficult to quantify on paper. It's Carolyn Beaumont, she said. I'm ready to move. There was a brief pause on the line. What did you hear? She told him. He was quiet for a moment in the way that lawyers are quiet when they are thinking quickly and don't want you to hear them doing it. The Kelowna property, he said. Can you access any documentation on it? I have the original purchase agreement, she said. And I have emails, 3 of them, from the year of purchase, where Lawrence explicitly referred to it as a joint investment and discussed how we'd use it in retirement. Another pause. Carolyn, Owen said, those emails are significant. I know. When did you? I've had them for 2 months, she said. I didn't know exactly when I'd need them. She could hear something shift in his voice. Not surprise exactly, but the particular recalibration that happens when someone realizes they're not dealing with the situation they thought they were dealing with. All right, he said. Here's what I need you to do today. What Lawrence did not understand about Carolyn, what he had fundamentally misread for the entirety of their marriage, was that her stillness was not passivity. She had come from a family of women who were quiet and thorough. Her mother, Ruth, had raised 3 children on her own after Carolyn's father left when Carolyn was 9, and she had done it with the calm efficiency of a woman who understood that falling apart was a luxury she could not afford. She taught Carolyn to document things, to keep copies, to know exactly what she had before she needed to prove it. Men like to believe women are sentimental. Ruth had told her once, years ago, when Carolyn was probably too young to understand it fully. They're counting on that. They think your feelings will slow you down. Carolyn had not forgotten that. While Lawrence was on his calls that morning, at least 2 of them she suspected, with his own lawyer. Carolyn moved through the house with the unhurried focus of someone who had rehearsed this. She photographed documents. She accessed the joint accounts and transferred, within the amounts her lawyer had specified were legally appropriate, funds to a personal account she had opened quietly 6 months prior at a separate institution. She located the folder in Lawrence's filing cabinet. She had always managed the household paperwork, another thing he had never thought to question, and removed the copies she needed. She did not take anything that was not hers. That was important to her. Not for moral reasons, exactly. She was beyond performing virtue for an audience of one, but because she understood that what came next would be examined carefully and she wanted her hands to be clean. At noon, Lawrence came downstairs, made himself a sandwich, and told her he'd be working late. That's fine, she said. She was sitting at the kitchen island with a cup of tea, reading or appearing to read. He did not look at her as he went back upstairs. She waited until she heard his door close. Then she called her daughter. Fiona Beaumont was 21, in her 2nd year at the University of British Columbia, studying environmental policy. She was direct and perceptive in the way that children of complicated marriages sometimes become. They learn early to read rooms, to track subtle emotional weather, to understand that what adults say and what adults mean are frequently different things. Mom, Fiona said when Carolyn told her in plain terms what was happening. How long have you known? Suspected? 2 years. Known, since last night. A silence. What are you doing? Everything I should have done sooner, Carolyn said. But I'm doing it now. Do you need me to come home? Not yet. I'll tell you when. Fiona was quiet for a moment. Then, does he know that you know? No, Carolyn said. Good, said Fiona, and there was something in her voice, steady, unsentimental, that sounded exactly like her grandmother. Lawrence filed for divorce on a Thursday. Carolyn had filed on the Tuesday before. The look on his face, when his lawyer called to inform him, a look that Carolyn was not present to see but would later be described to her, was reportedly one of complete incomprehension. Not anger, initially. Confusion. The specific confusion of a man who has spent 23 years underestimating someone, and is only now confronting the cost of that error. He called her directly, which surprised her. She had expected him to route everything through counsel. She let it go to voicemail. His message was short. Call me back. We need to talk about this. His voice had that measured quality he used in negotiations, controlled. Neither warm nor aggressive. The voice of a man who believes he can still shape the outcome. She did not call back. What Lawrence discovered over the following weeks was that the position he had assumed he was in, advantaged, prepared, holding the majority of the assets, was considerably less secure than he had believed. The emails Carolyn had retained established a clear pattern of shared investment intent on the Kelowna property, which placed it within the scope of matrimonial assets, despite the title being held in his name alone. The informal design and consulting work she had performed for his company over 16 years, work she had documented in a way that she had never mentioned, gathering the numbers quietly, cross-referencing with project valuations, estimating fair market rates for services rendered, constituted a contribution to matrimonial property that his lawyers had not anticipated having to account for. There was also the matter of the consulting agreement. 6 months prior, on Owen Farquhar's advice, Carolyn had formalized, retroactively with carefully gathered documentation, a professional relationship between herself and Beaumont Properties, a simple contract for consulting services in architectural design and client presentation. Lawrence had signed it 2 years earlier during a period when he had been asking her to help prepare materials for a major bid, and she had suggested, mildly, that they make it official. He had glanced at it, signed it without reading it carefully, and forgotten about it entirely. He had not forgotten what the contract was for. He had simply failed to understand what it documented. She had kept the original. Owen Farquhar was not a dramatic man. He wore gray suits and drank black coffee and chose his words the way a careful carpenter chooses materials. Nothing wasted, nothing decorative, everything load-bearing. When he reviewed with Carolyn in their 4th meeting what the full scope of her claim now encompassed, he set down his pen and looked at her over his glasses. "You've been building this for a while," he said. "I've been paying attention for a while," she said. "It's not the same thing." He considered that. "How did you know to keep the contract?" "I didn't know I'd need it in particular," she said. "I kept everything. When you don't have formal credit for your work, you learn to create your own record." He nodded slowly. There was something in his expression that might have been admiration, if admiration were something Owen Farquhar allowed himself professionally. "Lawrence is going to claim you had no independent professional standing during the marriage," he said. "I know," she said. "That's why I have 16 years of documentation that says otherwise." The proceedings took 8 months. They were not pleasant. Lawrence was not a man who accepted the rearrangement of power gracefully, and his legal team worked hard. There were motions and counter-motions. There was a forensic accountant, retained by Carolyn's side, whose report on the contributions to Beaumont Properties was thorough in a way that made Lawrence's lawyers go quiet for 2 days before responding. Lawrence attempted at one point to renegotiate directly. He called Fiona. That was a mistake he would not repeat. Fiona called her mother afterward, calm but tight-voiced. "He tried to tell me you were being unreasonable," she said. "That you were making things harder than they needed to be." Carolyn was quiet for a moment. "What did you tell him?" "I told him I'd be discussing it with you and that he should communicate through his lawyer." "Good girl, Mom," Fiona said. "You know this isn't actually about you being unreasonable, right? He thought you'd be too sad to be strategic. He planned the whole thing around that." "I know," Carolyn said. "He didn't know you very well?" "No," Carolyn said, "he didn't." The settlement was finalized on a gray October morning in Calgary. Carolyn sat across a boardroom table from Lawrence for the first time since the proceedings had begun. He had aged in the 8 months. Not dramatically, but in the way that men age when circumstances stop cooperating with the image they have of themselves. He looked like what he was. Someone who had made a calculation that did not account for all the variables. He did not look at her when the papers were brought in. She looked at him. Not with anger. She had moved through anger months ago. Somewhere around the 3rd or 4th time his lawyers had tried to characterize her contributions as hobbyist interest rather than professional work. What she felt, sitting across from him in that gray room, was something closer to clarity. The particular cleanness of a decision already made. The settlement included an equitable share of the Kelowna property, a portion of the business valuation attributable to her consulting contributions, the family home in Calgary, and a spousal support arrangement that her lawyer had negotiated with the forensic accountant's report as a backbone. It was not everything. It was fair, which is a different thing. Carolyn had not come to ruin Lawrence. She had come to leave him. And to leave intact the life she had built, which he had tried to collapse quietly and call it natural. When the papers were signed, Lawrence's lawyer spoke briefly in a low voice to Lawrence. Lawrence nodded once. He stood. He did not look at Carolyn. He walked out of the boardroom without speaking. She sat for a moment after he left. Owen was beside her, gathering papers with his usual efficient quiet. Outside the window the city was doing what it always did. Traffic moving, clouds shifting, people going about their mornings as though nothing particular had happened. "Are you all right?" Owen asked without looking up from his folder. "Yes," she said. And she meant it in a way she had not been able to mean it for a long time. That winter Carolyn Ashford, She had legally resumed her birth name on the same day the settlement was finalized. Moved to Vancouver. She had chosen Vancouver before the proceedings were over, when she was still technically in the middle of negotiating her future. She had looked at neighborhoods. She had thought about what kind of work she wanted to return to. She had driven her daughter around the city during a visit, not mentioning any of it, just letting herself imagine. It helped. She found a small office in a building near Cambie Street and began the process of reinstating her professional accreditation. It was more paperwork than she had anticipated, and it moved at the particular pace of official processes, which is to say, slowly and without apparent concern for urgency. She did not mind. She had learned in the last 2 years that patience applied in the right direction is not the same thing as waiting. One is passive, the other is preparation. Fiona came down from UBC on weekends sometimes. They would walk along the seawall and eat at places Carolyn was still discovering. Fiona was studying hard and had a group of friends she seemed to genuinely like, which was the kind of thing that felt like a relief in an uncomplicated way. "Are you happy?" "Why?" Fiona asked one evening, in the unprompted, earnest manner that was one of her best qualities. Carolyn thought about it honestly. "I'm getting there," she said. "It's different from happy. It's more like, I can see the floor again. I know where I'm standing." Fiona thought about that for a moment. "That sounds better than happy, actually." "It is," Carolyn said. "Happy is a feeling. This is a foundation." They walked a while longer without talking. The water was dark and the lights across the inlet were starting to come on. People ask, sometimes. Friends who had known her through the marriage, colleagues from before, acquaintances who heard the broad outline of the story, why she hadn't acted sooner. Why she had stayed as long as she had. Why she had let so many years go by without fighting for herself more visibly. It's a fair question, and it doesn't have a simple answer. What Carolyn would say if she answered it honestly is that she did not recognize for a long time that there was anything to fight. She had believed she was in a partnership. When the partnership began to feel uneven, she made adjustments, as people do. When it became something worse than uneven, she tried to understand it, to communicate her way through it, to find the version of the situation that still made sense as the life she had agreed to. What she had not understood, what took the longest to understand, was that she was not in a negotiation with someone who was negotiating in good faith. She was in a situation that had been structured deliberately over years to leave hers with as little leverage as possible at the end. The moment she understood that, clearly and without flinching, was not the night in the hallway. That night confirmed it. The understanding had been building before, in the notebook in her coat pocket, in the quiet consultations with Owen, in the careful documentation of work that Lawrence had always expected her to provide, and never expected to account for. She had not acted sooner because she had not been ready sooner. She acted when she was ready. That is not a failure. That is the truth of how these things go. The other thing she would say, the thing she thought about more than any other, in the months after, is this: he had one miscalculation that cost him everything he thought he had arranged. He believed that the woman he was leaving behind was the same woman who had signed those papers at 29, in love and unprepared. He had not noticed that she had changed. He had been looking at her every day for 23 years, and he had stopped seeing her sometime around year 7. And he had gone on making decisions based on an image of Carolyn that no longer corresponded to the person actually standing in his kitchen. That was not Carolyn's failure to communicate. That was Lawrence's failure to pay attention. And in the end, that failure cost him exactly as much as it should have. Carolyn Ashford registered her architectural consulting firm in British Columbia in the early spring. She named it after her mother,